and welcome everyone. I was just trying to look at chat, but you guys are chatting too fast and I can't read that fast. Uh, welcome everyone to the second program in our Outlander Highlands to Carolina series. And I just have to close chat because it's real distracting, and I'm so happy that you guys are here. We are very glad you're joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed the kickoff program this past Tuesday. I know that we did. I'm Erin, and with me tonight is my partner in crime, Heidi. Come on and say hi, Heidi. Hi, Heidi.
I'm coming. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you again. Probably a lot of the same people.
Yes, we are both librarians with Wake County Public Libraries right here in North Carolina's capital county and capital city. And we're happy to see you, or at least your names, in chat tonight. Okay, so if you were in the program on Tuesday, this is going to sound very familiar, so I'm going to try to go through it, but we might have a few new people, so bear with me. So like we did on Tuesday, Heidi is going to turn off chat so no one can chat while I run through my housekeeping because she's going to be putting some important information in chat and we want y'all to see it. So our program tonight is 1 hour with time for questions at the end, time permitting, of course. And we do have questions that you submitted for in your registration form. If you've done that, don't bother asking them again in chat. We've got you covered. Captions and transcripts from Zoom are available during the program. You can toggle those on and off as you wish by using the button on the Zoom toolbar on your screen. This program, as I said, is the second in our Outlander Highlands to Carolina program series, and we have many resources for you. Please visit our webpage. You see that on the bottom of your the screen. Visit our webpage for book lists, videos, and information about our presenters. You can also sign up for the rest of the programs in the series if you haven't already. I feel like all of you have by our registration numbers, and we thank you. Any information gathered tonight will be put on the website and also go out in the post-program email. I'm sure y'all know how that works by this point. We are recording this, and you will get to the link to where that recording will live in the post-program email. And again, as I said on Tuesday, mark me, the county is going to get the recording out and ready as soon as they can. But please bear with us, especially as we go further on into the series, if it takes a little bit longer. The first program is actually just about ready to be made public, which is very exciting. We're hoping the remainder of the programs are processed as quickly, but we make no promises. So don't get your hopes up and let's just manifest the quickness, okay? And please repeat that to your friends who weren't able to attend tonight when they ask you, hey, where's the recording? Thank you so much. And lastly, I don't even need to say this, but please use the chat feature to post questions or chat with us or to each other. Like I said before, if you did ask a question in the registration form, you don't have to worry about doing that again. And please take a second to set your chat audience to everyone. So any questions you ask of us, the hosts and panelists, when we respond to you, it doesn't sound like we're talking to ourselves, because we do that enough as it is. And I know on Tuesday, we had some people who were not a fan of having the chat open, and that's completely okay. No obligation to chat. We don't mind that at all. You can toggle the settings for that in your Zoom setting, like on your side. So Heidi is taking the chance and opportunity right now to put probably too much information in chat about how to do that, depending on the device you have. We're just trying to make it so that the people who can chat, and the people who don't want to chat or find chat distracting, that they don't have to be bothered by it. So please take this opportunity as I ramble for a few more seconds to read everything that Heidi's putting in chat and kind of set your settings accordingly. Thank you for that. And we've got obviously more programs left in the series. So if you haven't yet, please sign up. Information about this will also be in that post-program email as usual. And I know that most of you heard me say this on Tuesday, but get used to it. We're going to say it 6 more times throughout the series. WCPL has a quick exit survey that we would love for you to take part in. Please scan the code on your screen or just wait until that post-program email goes out. And then takes like 2 minutes. We would love your feedback and we really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And now the main event, the person you're all here for. I'm very pleased to welcome Hunter Ingram, Assistant Museum Director at the, okay, this is going to make me laugh and I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm going to say it now. Burgwin. Apparently you can say it either way, and so there you go. So don't at me in chat or anything, okay, y'all? I'm probably going to say Burgwin-Wright just because that's how I read it. Um, Oh boy. Okay. Hunter's the assistant museum director at that place, which is a fabulous place. A North Carolina native, Hunter has worked with the history of the Lower Cape Fear since his time as a reporter for the Wilmington Star News starting in 2013. At the newspaper, he created and hosted the award-winning local history podcast, Cape Fear Unearthed, each episode of which shared a different story from the region's rich history. He's also hosted tours, speaking events, and speaking engagements throughout the podcast and newspaper time, as well as covering the North Carolina film industry. Hunter is currently, as I said, the assistant director at the Burgwin-Wright House in Wilmington, North Carolina. He's also the host of the fantabulous podcast associated with the house, Outlander in the Cape Fear. If you have not listened to it yet, what are you waiting for? Please do that, but don't start until after this program, okay? Welcome, Hunter. We're so happy to have you tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron, and thank you everybody who's here. I'm thrilled to talk to you about Outlander. And, oddly enough, I was telling Aaron and Heidi earlier that I was giving an Outlander in the Cape Fear River cruise about an hour and a half ago. And so Outlander is alive and well here in the Cape Fear on any given day, which is always fun to be a part of. And you might have seen it, but I have some incredibly exciting news about Outlander, literally in the Cape Fear, that I'm going to talk about. That was just announced today, but we're going to talk about that at the end. So I give you a reason to stick around until the very end. I just want to tell you before I go off camera and show you my screen to walk through our presentation tonight that I'm in the Burgwin-Wright House in downtown Wilmington. Right behind me, you can't really see it too well, but that gentleman right there is Royal Governor Arthur Dobbs. He's actually the predecessor of Royal Governor William Tryon, who, of course, is a very important figure in the Outlander story. So I just wanted to show you over my shoulder. We'll talk a little bit about the house just at the beginning and where I work, but I just wanted to say a quick hello on camera, and then I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can look at this presentation that I've made for tonight's event or talk. And I'm actually going to hide my loading controls there. All right. Now I hope everybody can see my screen. I'm thrilled to do this conversation with you because I was able to do a similar conversation last year at the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games because my job at the Burgwin-Wright House is to talk about Outlander and its involvement in the history of the local region, which would be the Cape Fear region, the lower Cape Fear region. And that doesn't afford me every opportunity to talk about Outlander across the state. And so we're going to talk a lot about Outlander in the Cape Fear today. We're going to talk about how it intersects with fact, how it intersects with fiction, how those two go hand in hand when we talk about all of this. But I also want to travel across the state a little bit and talk a little bit about how that intersects with our real history. And so we're going to do that from the coast to the mountains. And so we're going to start, though, with what Heidi mentioned just briefly. There to the right is the Burgwin-Wright House. It is the oldest and largest historic site here in Wilmington. It was the city's first jail, as we will talk about in detail in just a few moments. And once the jail was built in 1744, it was here for about 25 years, and then the prisoners and the operations were moved. The property was sold, and the jail building that you see there at the bottom, the stone base, that was used as the foundation for the home that I'm sitting in right now, which was built in 1770 by a planter and a merchant named John Burgwin. He was also a politician. His boss was Royal Governor Arthur Dobbs, the man above me here in the room. And John built the house to entertain the wealthy and powerful prior to the American Revolution and during the American Revolution, even though he was not here. John built the house when he was involved with the British government. He was, for all intents and purposes, a loyalist, even though he was not here in Wilmington during the Revolution. And so the house, I think, and no one's here to tell me otherwise, is represented in the TV show and I'm going to show you the exact moment that it is when we go down through our presentation. So to the left, though, is the logo for our podcast, Burgwin-Wright Presents Outlander in the Cape Fear. We do several different topics on the Burgwin-Wright Presents podcast, but our recurring feature is Outlander in the Cape Fear. It is by far our most popular. We have been listened to in almost, I think we're at 49 countries and all 50 states. And we have over 30,000 listeners, and each episode of the podcast, which is free to listen to on all podcast platforms, as I'll tell you at the end of the show. All of the episodes feature historians, experts. It even features the showrunner of Outlander, Matt Roberts, and we talk about the real history of North Carolina filtered through the lens of Outlander, which I think all of you are interested in because you are all here tonight. And so I hope that you'll listen to the podcast. As I said, I'll mention how you can find it at the end of this program. And so, but let's talk about Outlander. You all know Outlander. I put this slide in here because oftentimes I talk to people who have no idea what Outlander is. They were drugged to these presentations and lectures and walking tours and river cruises that I do by their spouses, or because they're curious, they just started watching Outlander on Netflix. Whatever the case may be, I give a little precursor, but I didn't take it out because I love looking at these posters and seeing the journey that the TV show at least has gone on. Of course, this was a foundational book series by Diana Gabaldon before this ever came to the television screen. And so I like to acknowledge this. Now, one thing I will say, Diana's books are incredibly, incredibly dense in the best way possible. They have so much history. She spent months here in the Cape Fear region in the 1990s working with local historians that we work with even today to research the Scottish history of the Cape Fear and of North Carolina. Her books have so much detail in them that oftentimes I've found that the TV show is a nice kind of middle ground. Not everybody who reads the books watches the TV show, and even fewer. So, or sometimes I find people who love the books and don't like the TV show, or vice versa. And so I put these visuals here because the books are wonderful, but the TV show has provided us some visuals that will help kind of tell the story that I'm going to tell you today. And so all credit to Stars for all of these photos. And for all of these beautiful campaigns that they've run over the years to promote the TV show. I do like to just put this in here because, of course, Outlander sadly does not film in Wilmington. It does not film in North Carolina. They are filming in Scotland. Now, I always tell people who are sad about that fact, you could not faithfully recreate colonial North Carolina in North Carolina today, especially in downtown Wilmington. If you've ever been here, you know it is a very bustling, small, but growing town. And so they would have a hard time trying to replicate colonial Wilmington, colonial North Carolina across our state today. The mountains would be a great place to do it, but let's be honest, Scotland looks a lot more like colonial North Carolina than North Carolina does today. And so it makes sense why they stayed in Scotland to film. But of course, this is a digital recreation of Jamie and Claire looking out at their new home once they make it to the future of Fraser's Ridge in the 4th season of the TV show. So let's talk about our movement across the state. Now, I know that when you talk to Dawn, or you listen to Dawn's talk earlier this week, she talked about some of the locations across the state that are important to this area's history. And what I want to do is I'm going to follow a similar path on some of those, but I want to talk about how the show and the books interact with the history along the way, and what's real, what's purely fiction, and what is some type of amalgamation of the two to serve the story that's being told with Jamie and Claire. And so we're going to start in the Cape Fear region because, of course, that's where I am. That's where I talk about. That's what I talk about every single day. And we're going to go to a few different locations here. But if you'll bear with me, we're going to start at Brunswick Town because that's exactly where so many Scottish will find their American story begin. Between 1739 and 1775, there will be nearly 20,000 people from Scotland who will immigrate through Brunswick Town, which is the first permanent settlement on the Cape Fear River. It is about 14 miles south of Wilmington on the river, and it is about 14 miles north of the mouth of the Cape Fear River. The Cape Fear is the only river in North Carolina with direct access to the ocean, so this was the gateway to the colony for so many people, and it was for the Scottish. This site is not something that we've seen represented in the TV show, unfortunately. It's one of the blind spots that I do have to call the TV show out for, though. It is a TV show with a budget, so they can't go everywhere. The books often mention Brunswick. We see a lot of that throughout the story. We see a lot of young Ian going down there specifically. But to your right, that is St. Philip's Church. That is what it looks like today under the arches. And to the left is actually a photo from the early 1900s when a group known as the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the state of North Carolina would hold their annual meeting at St. Philip's at Brunswick Town. Today, Brunswick Town is a state historic site, but it was not always that case. And St. Philip's does not have a roof anymore, as you can see, but it is an incredibly important part of the arrival of anybody immigrating through the Cape Fear region. But I always like to point this out to people because this would have been among the first sites for people like Jamie and Claire. And of course, we love walking in the footsteps of Jamie and Claire, but they're really walking in the footsteps of very real Scottish who came to North Carolina and settled here in those colonial years. I always like showing off Brunswick Town, and I'm a big collector of vintage postcards of the Cape Fear region, things that don't exist anymore, or things that have changed. And this is one of those meetings of the colonial dames at St. Philip's in the early 1900s. And I will note they're the ones who helped save that structure. They are also the group that preserves colonial structures across the state of North Carolina. They have 4 that they own and operate today. I'm sitting in their headquarters house. They are the ones who raised $21,000 in 1937 to buy the Burgwin-Wright house and save it from being demolished by Standard Oil, which wanted to tear the house down and replace it with a gas station here at the corner of 3rd and Market Street. And so we're very fortunate that they did not do that. But this would have been among the first things that those like Jamie and Claire would have seen. It's not something, again, that we've seen in the TV show. It's something mentioned briefly in the books, but I do like to make sure that people know that Brunswick Town was a fact of life for the people coming through the Cape Fear region in the colonial period. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind when you're talking about Jamie and Claire and their arrival in the Cape Fear region is that when they arrive in 1767, the Cape Fear is a hotbed for rebellion. Just a year prior, we were the site of one of the first ever armed rebellions against the British government in the colonies, and it was over the Stamp Act Rebellion. You'll see the stamp there in the bottom left-hand corner. The one that is red there to the left, that is the official stamp that Parliament declared colonists had to pay for any piece of printed material that was moving through the ports in the colonies. The one on the right, right beside it, is the propaganda, the mockery stamp that they actually started publishing in protest of this. There were protests across the colonies, but you have to acknowledge, if you're talking about Outlander and the time in which Jamie and Claire arrived in their new home in North Carolina, the Cape Fear was coming off an armed rebellion against William Tryon, the man who entertains Jamie and Claire when they first arrive in this story. And that's important. It's not something that you often see in the TV show. It's mentioned a little bit in the books. It's reflected a little bit in the books, but it was a very big deal that the citizens of the Cape Fear rose up against the Stamp Act, as others did, but then took up arms against William Tryon in protest of it. They forced him to relinquish people from his own home at Brunswick Town, where he was living. When Jamie met Royal Governor Arthur Dobbs, when Jamie met Royal Governor William Tryon, he was living at Brunswick Town. It was considered the seat of power. And so this was a very important place in the Cape Fear and across North Carolina. And the Stamp Act Rebellion saw about 500 citizens take up arms, go to William Tryon's home at Brunswick, and threaten to force their way inside and remove the comptroller of customs, the man responsible for accepting those stamps. William Tryon did relinquish him after forcing him to resign, so he could report back that the mob did not have a chance to force his employee to resign. And then he had to report back to the king, which did not make him look very good that his own colonists had conspired against him. And so Tryon is desperate when Jamie and Claire meet him when they arrive in Wilmington. Not every Scottish man would find an audience with the royal governor as soon as he arrived But William Tryon needed people like Jamie because Jamie could rally his countrymen. Jamie could get those people who signed loyalty pledges to fight for the king to come over to the colony and make a second chance at life, take a new chapter after the failed Battle of Culloden. They knew that Jamie could pull those men together and rally the troops. And so getting someone like Jamie on your side, even though Claire has some inside information about which side of the history they should be on, was a very big part of William Tryon's role in the years leading up to the American Revolution and his time here in the Cape Fear region. Now, if you know the TV show well, you'll know that this is the one and only view. We get an aerial shot of Wilmington. Now, of course, this is a digital recreation. One thing I always like to tell people is that is Brunswick County, where Brunswick Town is. You're actually looking north on the Cape Fear River, so Brunswick Town is actually south, but this is the kind of view you would have had if you managed to get a bird's eye view of colonial Wilmington. Lots of colorful wooden homes, very busy there by the port. And this, of course, is one of the earliest scenes in Outlander's fourth season. But I want to make one note. This is the map of colonial Wilmington, first drawn by Saudier. He was a famous map designer in 1769. You'll notice that Wilmington is only about 3 blocks. That's all it was. It was very much focused on the river. But if that is Market Street that we just saw in our last thing, their Market Street is pointing the wrong direction. Market Street in Wilmington actually points towards the river. It does not point north. And what is happening on the street in that scene, which if you remember from Outlander is actually the hanging of one of Jamie and Claire's friends. We'll talk about that in a second. This happened on Market Street. And so visually, this is not anatomically correct for what Wilmington would have looked like in the colonial period. But we'll give them a little bit of a pass because they gave us a digital recreation of colonial Wilmington. And that is simply something that a nonprofit house museum does not have the funds to recreate on our own. So I am very grateful for Outlander for giving us that visual. And again, this is all Wilmington was in 1769. It was 3 blocks. If you look closely, you can see where there is the letter C right there in the heart of it. It's very small, but that is the city's first jail. That is where I'm sitting. That is the site of the house today. But we actually get a view of the important aspect of that first episode of the TV show. And I point to this because this is a reality throughout Diana's books. But in the TV show, they really have one chance to remind you of the stakes of the colonial period. And this is it. That Jamie and Claire are walking a very tight rope because she knows what's to come. She knows there's a revolution on the horizon. But they still have to live in this time. They still have to live day to day in this time. And so they need to look at the realities of it. And one of the realities was a rigid justice system. It was a class system. People brought to the city jail here were not brought here just because they committed crimes, but because they committed crimes against people who were of a higher station than them. A class system means that you are being punished based on who you are and who you've committed your crime against. And of course, this is the scene where Jamie and Claire's friend has been charged with adultery and with murder. And murder today is absolutely a punishable offense, but adultery is not. And so there were crimes at the time that we would not punish today. Adultery is one of them. Another one would be gossiping. Of course, if you're gossiping against someone who is more powerful than you and they don't like the things you're saying, that could be considered libelous fodder. They could go after you for gossiping about them. And my favorite one that was often a crime, depending on who you were, was swearing. And if you know Claire Fraser, she has the mouth of a sailor. And so she is constantly using phrases that would be considered vile and completely inappropriate for the time that she is living in. And so Claire would have been repeatedly punished in the colonial period because of her mouth, if you will, which we all love because it shows her rebellious ways in small ways and in big ways. But Claire would have run afoul of the colonial justice system in many, many ways. And of course, we know she finds herself on the wrong side of the law for things that she doesn't even do. But swearing, I think she would even cop to swearing. And so I always find that to be a funny aspect of this moment in history. But I always like showing this. It's not a great visual. Obviously, the sight of someone being hanged is never something you want to see, but that was the reality of the time. All of these punishments that happened here at the site were done in the public eye. They believed that if you showed people the punishment, they wouldn't commit the crime. And so a visible hanging on the streets of Wilmington was absolutely accurate. Diana Gabaldon got that right because they would often drag the gallows out into the road so it would stop traffic and force the town, as you see here, to stop what they're doing and watch the consequences of breaking the king's law. It was that serious. And today, if you visit the Burgwin-Wright house, you can still see both the original jail building and also our debtors' cells, which you see here. And then, of course, we have the jailer's quarters, which will eventually become the kitchen house for the main home when it is built. And so there are only 8 remaining colonial structures in Wilmington today, and 4 of them are on our property. You have the original jail building, which still has the dungeon underneath it. You have the debtors' cells, which was a freestanding building at the time. You have the jailer's quarters. And then, of course, you have the main home built up top in 1770. And so we have half of colonial Wilmington here on our site. If you've never been, I'm going to say it a few times, but we do encourage you to visit. Now let's talk about some of the faces that you would have seen in Wilmington at the time. We've mentioned William Tryon, and we're going to talk about him in just a second. But another one that Claire actually encounters more recently in the story, in the 7th book, or the 6th and 7th book, and then, of course, the 7th season of the show, is down there at the right. That is Josiah Martin. He is the final royal governor of North Carolina. She encounters him specifically in the TV show in the season 1 premiere. She's being held for a crime that I will not spoil, but she gets an audience with Josiah Martin, who finds a different purpose for her with his pregnant wife. And she learns of some very important history that we're going to talk about in just a few moments through her interactions with Josiah Martin. And so Jamie and Claire interacting with these 2 men is very factual because they were the men in power at the time. But again, keep in mind that not everybody would have the access to them that Jamie and Claire did. Not to quote the Hamilton musical, but Jamie and Claire as characters have to be in the room where it happens to understand the decisions that were made in the colonial period of America that had ramifications for the immediate future and for generations to come. And it was men like William Tryon and Josiah Martin who were making those decisions. And Jamie and Claire need to be in those rooms so that you can see just how important, sometimes dismissive and prejudicial, and all these things they were. But that's why Jamie and Claire's story is so exciting. They find themselves at the worst moments in history, to be frank, all kinds of war and all kinds of things, but they also find themselves in the lap of luxury because terrible moments and luxurious palaces are where history is often made. Not the only places, but that's where a lot of decision making happens. And so having them in these rooms is very important for Diana Gabaldon's story. Now, one just specific example I want to show you of Wilmington's history intersecting with Outlander is in the 4th season of the TV show. Jamie and Claire, they've gone west, they've come back, and they are going to be entertained with a night at the theater by William Tryon and his wife, who you see down there in the bottom left. And they are there to see a play that Tryon mentions is written by a Wilmington son. I had a hunch some of the lines mentioned in that episode can actually be pulled and Googled, and you will find that they're lines from a play known as The Prince of Parthia. The Prince of Parthia is said to be the first drama written by an American and produced on a professional stage in the American colonies. And Thomas Godfrey was living in Wilmington when he wrote this play. He died several years before it was ever published in 1765. So just a few years before Jamie and Claire arrived. But this marker, as you can see, is put up in 1929 by the colonial dames, the same ones who saved the house that I'm in today. And this marker is actually just a block from the house. It's in the graveyard of St. James Episcopal Church, which is next door to us. It is also the final resting place of someone else we're going to mention in just a second. But I like to mention this episode. And next week, when you talk with Charles Brett, who is an incredible speaker about colonial medicine, me and him always have fun talking about this particular episode, because if you'll remember, Claire will actually perform hernia surgery on one of Tryon's guests in the lobby of that theater. And we always love talking about the fact and the fiction of that moment. Uh, I love this little fact about the Prince of Parthia because it shows the detail and the nuance that the TV show and, of course, Diana's books made to show you that this is an authentic story. We're dealing with time travel, we're dealing with epic love. These are not things that would often be put at the heart of a history lesson. Um, but they help convey some very real and very often forgotten history. I can tell you that more people talk about the Prince of Parthia because of Outlander and the amount of talks I do about it than probably ever before. And if anything else is important, that's important about Outlander because it puts this history in front of people who may never have encountered it before. And that's why we're so grateful to Outlander and to Diana and the TV show for helping spread the history of this area in ways that we never could ourselves. Now, I will note that this episode has one very interesting fabrication on history. And that, of course, is earlier in the episode when Jamie and Claire are in the lobby of this theater, which did not exist at the time. If you've been to Wilmington, you might be thinking it's our beautiful Thalian Hall, one of the oldest and largest theaters still operating here in the United States. But that was actually built in 1855 through 1858. And so it's just about 80 years too late to be part of Jamie and Claire's story in this episode. But Wilmington had a vibrant theater community even then. It still does today. But when they're in the lobby of this episode in this theater, Claire points out a very tall, handsome young man across the way who she identifies as George Washington. George Washington was not in Wilmington as a young man, even though they are, of course, in Wilmington in this episode. He does not come to town that we know of course, until he travels on his southern tour in 1791. And so that's a little bit of a fabrication. I will say, Outlander went to great pains to put, pieces of the Prince of Parthia into this show without ever truly naming it. Excuse me. And it was really fascinating to see them revisit this topic very briefly in the most recent season of the TV show. Now, again, I won't spoil too much of it for you, but Jamie is actually going to find himself interacting with George Washington in a moment. And George Washington remembers him by saying that they were both at the same god-awful play in Wilmington. And so I find it hilarious that they went to all that effort to promote the Prince of Parthia just to have George Washington criticize it several seasons later. And so don't listen to George Washington, at least the Outlander version of George Washington. From what I understand, even though I've never had the pleasure of seeing a true production of it, the Prince of Parthia is still a pretty good play. And so I like that they revisited that. Now, this I mentioned earlier. In a season 6 episode of Outlander, Jamie and Claire come back to Wilmington, as they often do, for a celebration of Scottish heroine Flora MacDonald. In the books, this takes place in Newbern, but as you can imagine, the TV show can only build so many towns that Diana Gabaldon's story travels to. And so we benefited greatly here in Wilmington that they built Wilmington first. And so they have transitioned a lot of those events throughout her books into a space in and around Wilmington. And so a lot of these things are just taking place on the streets of Wilmington. This is the home where they visit Flora MacDonald. It's got a beautiful gardens with it, as you'll see later in the episode when they may or may not engage in some illicit drug activity in the gardens. But this house is, revered in this TV show as, the grandest home in colonial Wilmington. Well, there was only one of those at the time, and it was the Burgwin-Wright house. I have given the producers of this TV show, including Matt Roberts, a hard time for not just painting it white and making my job easy to show the direct parallel of this house to the Burgwin-Wright house. But I put a nifty reminder of what the Burgwin-Wright house looks like there, just so you can see the similarities. Stone base, brick base, front stairs, you would have had balconies. And just as a connection, the Burgwin-Wright house did not initially have its upper roof over that top balcony. It was exposed like the blue house that you see here. And so this house is actually even more accurate to what the Burgwin-Wright house would have looked like at the time. And John Burgwin, as I mentioned, he was a loyalist. worked for the British government. And so Flora MacDonald, who was a mouthpiece for the Loyalist movement, if she was going to be in anybody's home, she would be entertained in a Loyalist home. And so if this did happen in Wilmington, which of course it happens in the books in New Bern, but if it happened in Wilmington, as this TV show tends to say, we would have had it here at the Burgwin-Wright House. Now, there, of course, is the aforementioned Flora MacDonald. There to the left is the real Flora MacDonald. Right beside her is, of course, the version that Outlander, the TV show, created. And then right next to her is Cornelius Harnett. He makes his debut in the same episode that Flora MacDonald arrives into our story. And Cornelius Harnett is the leader of the Sons of Liberty here in the Cape Fear region. I tell you that, and I point it out here for a few reasons. One, they could have made this figure who recruits Jamie to the Patriot cause. They could have made him Samuel Adams, and you would have completely understood the role that he plays in American history. Because we know that Samuel Adams was the leader of the Sons of Liberty in Boston. We know that Samuel Adams has his own beer today. And so, of course, we know who he is. Cornelius Harnett does not have his own, nationally circulated beer. And yet the TV show, and of course, Diana, they stuck with the real person that someone like Jamie would have encountered here in Wilmington. Someone who is not going to have the notoriety of Samuel Adams, but someone who would have been playing the exact same role for a smaller community here in the Cape Fear. Cornelius Harnett, as you'll see right there with that postcard, has been immortalized with the marker, not just to him, but to the development, the colonial development of the Cape Fear region. And that marker is at the intersection of 4th and Market, right next to St. James Episcopal Church graveyard. And that is where Cornelius Harnett is buried. He is actually buried right next to Thomas Godfrey. And so you can see both of their grave markers, just mere feet from this marker that was also put up by the colonial dames in 1924. And so all of these are very real figures here in the Cape Fear. I told you there was a lot of Cape Fear stuff because Outlander has put such an emphasis on our history here in the area, and we could not be more grateful. But let's talk about another event that happens just a little north of us. Now, I know you heard a little bit about this with Dawn on Tuesday, but the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge is such an important part of not only North Carolina and American history, but at the end of the day, it is the cornerstone of colonial Scottish history in North Carolina. It is going to be a very quick battle, lasts less than an hour. Still don't know how long it lasts for sure, between 15 minutes and about 45 minutes. But it's a very quick battle, and the losses suffered most greatly were among the Scottish, who were on the front lines, fulfilling those loyalty pledges, whether out of duty or out of true loyalty to the British. That marker that you see there to the right, that is to the Scottish, about 50 of them from the Highlands that fell that day, fighting for the king, fighting for King George and broadswords, which is the actual thing they shouted, King George and broadswords, as they stormed that compromised bridge. On the other side, a Patriot militia waiting for them that will open fire. It is the last place in history, not just in Scotland, but in history, that there will be a documented use of the broadsword charge, which was the characteristic fighting style of the Scots as they charged into battle. They are a very physical group at the time. And so they made themselves known. This was just a very difficult battle and an ambush that they were not prepared for. Moores Creek keeps the British out of the South for more than 3 years, which absolutely changes the direction of the American Revolution. Moores Creek today is the only national battlefield in North Carolina. We have a military park also run by the Park Service in Guilford Courthouse, which is near Greensboro, North Carolina. But this is our national battlefield. And it is such an important part of the Scottish story of North Carolina. Diana Gabaldon features it prominently in the climax of her 6th book, A Breath of Snow and Ashes. But the TV show skipped it, which is an incredible shame. I understand that they are ending, so they're moving through their story a bit quicker than they have been in the past. Um, but if I could say that Outlander, the TV show specifically, has done anything bad, it's that they skipped Moores Creek, because you cannot tell a Scottish story in America without talking about the sacrifices made by the Scots at Moores Creek. And we're going to talk about Moores Creek and Outlander for a very exciting announcement in just a few minutes. But specifically, Moores Creek leads to a pivotal moment in history. This is our North Carolina state flag. Now, if you look at the bottom, April 12th, 1776, that happens less than 2 months after Moores Creek. And that is because the momentum drawn up by the Patriot victory at Moores Creek will lead them to meet in Halifax, North Carolina, to write the Halifax Resolves, which effectively makes North Carolina the first colony to officially declare independence from the British. That is on our state flag because of how important it is. Then, of course, less than 3 months later, or 3 months later, you're going to have the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. And that is a domino effect from Moores Creek and the Halifax Resolves. There is a direct line between those events. And so it is very important to know the story of Moores Creek. And there's never been a better time to learn about it, because we are about to step into the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. And we're already standing in the 250th anniversary of the ongoing American Revolution. And so all of these stories are more important than they've been, and there's more awareness of them than there's been since potentially the bicentennial in 1976, 50 years ago. And so I encourage you to use the excitement of these programs that Wake County Libraries has so graciously put together for you, and just learn about things that you can then go and step foot on and learn more about as we sit with this 250th anniversary. And again, I know I keep teasing it, but there's something related to Moores Creek that we're going to talk about in just a second. Of course, in the TV show, they not only skipped Moores Creek, they also skipped the signing of the Declaration of Independence, a room that Jamie and Claire did not happen to be in. And this is just the first acknowledgement, and really the only acknowledgement of the Declaration in the TV show specifically, which of course will be pulled down and used to wipe someone's dirty boots on the British side. And so that should show you the antagonism that's happening as we get deeper into the American Revolution in the TV show. Now let's talk about one more place in the Cape Fear region before we leave. It's going to take us back just a year before Moores Creek, and it's Fort Johnston down in what is now Southport. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but when Josiah Martin is talking to Claire about caring for his pregnant wife in the season 7 opener of the TV show, he gets word that Fort Johnston has been burned. And Fort Johnston is a very important fort. It was meant to be the first guardian of the Cape Fear River and therefore Brunswick Town and Wilmington, but it was burned on July 19th, 1775. And that is the news that Claire is there to receive with Josiah Martin in the season 7 premiere. And so that was incredibly accurate. Josiah Martin was very scared of the Patriot militia trying to find him. So he had actually abandoned the governor's palace in Newbern, Tryon Palace, and had taken up residence on the HMS Cruiser offshore of Fort Johnston. And so they are right offshore when the rebels burn the fort to keep it out of British hands. And so I just always like to point that out. And another marker put up by the colonial dames here in North Carolina is that at Fort Johnston, this past July, we did celebrate the 250th anniversary of the burning of Fort Johnston, the first major event to happen in the American Revolution in the Cape Fear region. And then just a few months later, in February 1776, will be the Battle of Moores Creek, which means that we are approaching the 250th anniversary of Moores Creek, which we will return to in just a second. Now, one thing I love to talk about Outlander, something that is absolutely not true to fact, is its relationship with travel time. This is kind of an early map of North Carolina. It's very rudimentary. You've got all kinds of things in here. Of course, there on the bottom, you'll see it says Cape Fear. Getting up to Ocracoke or any of the islands on the Outer Banks would have taken a lot of time, which is funny because Outlander loves to be in one place in one scene and completely across the colony or in a different part of the colonies in the next. This is one of the only times you see them traveling. This is in the second episode of season 4, when they look also happy before they have encountered their time with Stephen Bonnet. Um, they are traveling up the Cape Fear River here, and we're going to talk about where they're headed. But travel time is not sexy. Outlander is a very sexy show. It's a great way to learn about your history through some very, you know, heavy panting. But I will say that it's not sexy to ask, "Are we there yet?" And so Outlander's relationship with travel time is hilarious because, of course, we only see a few scenes of them traveling up the Cape Fear River to Cross Creek. It would have taken them a few days, and it would have taken them weeks to get from Wilmington across the colony to Fraser's Ridge. One of my favorite examples, of course, they do meet Stephen Bonnet, who is inspired, at least in name, by Stede Bonnet, who was a very real pirate who lived about 50 years before Stephen enters the story of Jamie and Claire. Diana Gabaldon has mentioned that she sees him as more of an illegitimate offspring of Stede, even though Stede was known as the gentleman pirate. And I think if you know the Outlander story, you know that Stephen Bonnet is anything but a gentleman. So that travel time, because it took so long, they end up encountering and are robbed and assaulted in many ways by Stephen Bonnet. And so those are one of the many perils that would await people on the road or on the river as they traveled around. And so it was a very interesting way to see Outlander travel back and forth. One of my favorite instances is, and I think it's in season 5 of the show. They're talking about someone has been kidnapped. I will not say who, but someone has been kidnapped and been taken to Ocracoke. And they are in Wilmington when they acknowledge this. And then a scene or two later, they're in Ocracoke. It would take you 5.5 hours just to get to the Outer Banks from Wilmington today, let alone without roads and cars. And so Outlander, if it breezes over anything, it's over the tedious reality of time. Now, Cross Creek is where they are headed when they're in that boat that I mentioned. That is modern day Fayetteville. And this, of course, is River Run, Aunt Jocasta's home. She was among the first, or she would have been among the first, of the wealthier Scottish to immigrate to North Carolina. And that door was really opened for the Scots in 1739 by Gabriel Johnston, one of our early royal governors, the namesake of Fort Johnston, who was a Scot himself, and he missed his countrymen. He wanted more of them over here. And so people like Jocasta took the opportunity. Now, they had money. As we see in the era of Jamie and Claire arriving here, this would not have been the same situation for some Highlanders. After the Battle of Culloden, many of them came to the American colonies because they had no choice. But people like Aunt Jocasta were able to come and build beautiful plantations and estates for themselves. But you'll notice there in the background, there to the right, you'll see that there's another community very similar to Fraser's Ridge. I would say the big house is not as big as River Run here, but these were communities that were built with these immigrants from Scotland. Some of them had a tremendous amount of money, and some of them were a bit more middle or lower class. But you see that they would have created these communities wherever they had the opportunity. And Cross Creek, again, modern day Fayetteville, was absolutely one of them. And so I just always like pointing that out. That Jamie and Claire will come back and forth from Wilmington to the mountains, but they will oftentimes stop in at River Run, which would have just been a few days' journey up the Cape Fear River. And I'll note that we go about 45 minutes up the Cape Fear River in the direction that Jamie and Claire would have gone on our river cruises. It's not going to take you all the way to Cross Creek, but that 45 minutes, I always like to remind people, would have taken you all day long just to get that far, because there was no current in the Cape Fear River like there is today. That was dredging. And so that's another part that Outlander fictionalizes. It would have just been a crazy amount of travel and waiting. But the story, there's a lot happening. It's got to keep moving. And so travel time is not the most interesting. Of course, throughout these communities, and I put this here, Jamie and Claire are going to interact with people who don't look like them, who don't have the same privileges they have in life. Of course, at Aunt Jocasta's home, they encounter and have a real sticky situation when it comes to Claire's resistance to the institution of slavery, which of course would have been a reality at the time. When you're talking about Outlander and the era it exists in, you have to keep in mind that a town like Wilmington was a port city. We had more enslaved workers at points than we did white citizens that were here in town. And so if Jamie and Claire were walking the streets of our city, they would have seen more color than they wouldn't have. And of course, Jamie becomes the Indian agent and works with the Cherokee. Ian is a member of the Mohawk. And so these communities would have been everyday encounters for people like Jamie and Claire. It's something that the TV show specifically doesn't always have time to do. I wish it did. That's one of the things I wish that it was able to sit with a bit more, because the realities of the institution of slavery and the relations with Native communities was constantly on people's minds. It was absolutely part of daily life. And so it should be even more part of daily life for Jamie and Claire than even we get to see it. And so I always like to acknowledge that here when we're talking fact and fiction. Now, another one that we're going to do is talk about Alamance, modern day Burlington. Now, I'm sure you know of the Battle of Alamance. It happens in the fifth book and, of course, the fifth season of the TV show. A lot of people will attribute the Battle of Alamance, and the TV show and the book certainly lean into this distinction. But the Battle of Alamance is often referred to as the first spark of the revolution. The thing you have to keep in mind is it was not the first spark of the revolution, and people at Alamance Battleground will tell you that even today. Alamance was a struggle on the part of the regulator movement that did not have the same goals as the revolution. The regulator movement was made up of backcountry folk, people who were tired of being put upon with taxes and oppression, and they were just trying to push back a little bit for better representation. The revolution is fought for liberty, it's fought for freedom, it's fought for all of these things from Britain. The regulators were not interested in separating themselves from Britain to the greater degree that we see with the revolution. They were looking for an immediate easing of the stressors of their life. And so the battle at Alamance is not the first spark of the American Revolution. It is a completely different struggle that will see many of the same players involved with the revolution about 4 years later, but it is a completely different thing. If you've never been to Alamance Battleground, they do an incredible job interpreting that site. It's a big part of the Outlander story, of course. There's a whole section of the book and, of course, the TV show that's about it. The TV show will make you think that Scots were the main focus here at Alamance. It was a melting pot. You would have seen Irish there. You would have seen Scots. You would have seen other people who were here in the colonies for generations, but have fallen on hard times or were part of, simply lower income families. And so it was about making sure that you could fight for what you needed out of life. And that was not the same cause as the revolution. And so I always like to just provide that context for when we talk about Alamance. Now, I do want to caution that the next slide I'm going to show may be a little upsetting, but it is something that is pictured in the TV show. And it is the aftermath of the Battle of Alamance, where several of the people, including a very important character in this show, are hanged. Now, it took me several times actually watching this episode to realize that this is representing a very real event that happened after Alamance. And it's one that's actually commemorated with a marker by the colonial dames in Hillsborough, North Carolina, where it says, "On this spot were hanged by order of a Tory court, June 19th, 1771, Merle, Messer, Matter, Pugh, and 2 other regulators." That event, that again features an unnamed main character, which we will not talk about, was real. It was a real thing that was meant to be a punishment for resisting the king. And that being used as a way to talk about history and being used as a way to further the story of one of our main characters, I find fascinating. And I got to visit this site on a project that we're doing with the Colonial Dames for the 250th, and I took this photo. And I just love that, and I'm going to go back to that photo, that this very grim moment is still commemorated in North Carolina today, and it has a place in the Outlander story. And then finally, of course, across the mountains, we do have Fraser's Ridge, modern day Boone and Blowing Rock. We know it. We love it. It looks a little different for those of us who are caught up with the TV show and, of course, with the books. The big house is not there in its current form, at least. One thing I will note that I confirmed with the producers and Matt Roberts that they did not film anything here in North Carolina, but they did get blue B-roll of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And that's because Scotland is beautiful. It is undeniably one of the most beautiful places in the world. But even Scotland can't replicate the Blue Ridge Mountains. It is an otherworldly type of beauty. If you've never experienced it for yourself, I encourage you to do so. And so they did take some B-roll of the Blue Ridge Mountains to use throughout the TV show. And that's just a fact of being in North Carolina. We are able to travel from the coast to the mountains and see all of these incredibly beautiful and historically important, I should say that, historically important places. And that is part of our story. One other thing that they do feature in the TV show is Brienne and Roger, while they're still in the 20th century, they are going to visit the Scottish Festival, as it's called in the TV show. But of course, they are visiting what we know as the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, which is very close to where the real Fraser's Ridge would have been. You can see actually there to the right a photo taken from the 1956 inaugural Highland Games. It still goes on today. And I'm proud to say that they asked us to talk about Outlander and its history in North Carolina last year. And we had the largest lecture audience they've ever had at the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games. Outlander is a tremendously powerful tool. I think we all know that. We're sitting on a webinar right now with hundreds of people. But these are the types of things that it can actually depict for an audience that may or may not know about them. As you can see the parallels in that young woman there to the right and the young women there on a very similar stage from the TV show down there in the bottom left. And so highlighting some of these things just has tremendous power. And I hope that all of you who love the show and love the books and love this world that Diana has created, I hope you understand the power that your enthusiasm and your willingness to talk about these stories has, because it sends hundreds and really at this point thousands of people to historic sites like the Burgwin-Wright House, to the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, to Brunswick Town, to Tryon Palace, to Alamance Battleground, to Morris Creek, in droves. And for those of us who work at these sites hoping to get these stories out to people every single day, something like Outlander is just an invaluable tool and not a bad way to spend your day at work. So I just want to show you that all across this state, we have evidence of communities. We have a Scotland County. We have all kinds of things here in the area. And so Outlander, I spend my days talking about it in the context of the Cape Fear, but Outlander is a North Carolina story. More than any other colony you will see in those stories that Diana wrote, it is a North Carolina story. And I find that to be tremendously exciting. Just to wrap up, I want to go ahead and say that each season of our podcast is available to listen to. I'm not going to go through them all, but a lot of the things we've touched on, each episode that we've done, we talk about a different part of its history through North Carolina's colonial history with different historians, with different experts, with different people. We've done the first season of our podcast. We went back to it for the third season with a whole nother host of topics. And then we just recently did one for the seventh season where we talked about a few more. And we will have new episodes of the Outlander and the Cape Fear podcast in the spring when Outlander comes back and is unfolding. We love to release these alongside of the show so that they can kind of be a companion to your experience watching and reading and loving Outlander. You can listen on every single podcast platform. I made sure that I put it out there. My guinea pig for this is my father. If my father, who is terrible with technology, can find it, so can you. And if you can't find it in that way, it is at the burgwin-wrighthouse.com website. There is a tab at the top that says podcast, and you can listen to every single one of our episodes for free. What's to come? Well, if you can make your way down to Wilmington, you can come and take one of our river cruises and our walking tours. Our next walking tours are actually going to be next month, November 14th and 15th. We walk around downtown Wilmington for about an hour and a half. It's not a strenuous walk, and we talk about some of the things that we have talked about on this topic, on this program today. And we do a walking tour of different topics every second Friday of the month here at the Burgwin-Wright House. And if you come on November 15th, you'll be here for our holiday craft market, where we'll have about 40 local vendors throughout the property. So you can learn a little Outlander history and then come shop local. And there to the left, we have the poster for our river cruises. And that QR code does take you to the page where you can buy tickets. We are still finding dates for 2026. We are looking at March 7th, which is a Saturday, I believe, for these cruises. We have a lot of fun. Like I said, I did one earlier today. And so we have a blast with some of these things. You get to travel, whether it's on foot or on a boat, the same paths that Jamie and Claire, and more importantly, real Scottish Highlanders did. And then for the thing that I've been teasing all day, announced this morning, Diana Gabaldon will be the special guest at Moores Creek's First in Freedom Festival on or starting February 21st through the 28th in 2026. This is something that Moores Creek has been planning for over a year. There are a ton of things that are happening with her while she's in town. She's going to be doing a book signing. She's going to be attending some of the events at Moores Creek throughout the weekend. And we are still pulling the information together, so I don't have specifics for you at this moment. But she will also be doing a special program in Pender County on Friday, February 27th, the actual 250th anniversary of Moores Creek, where she is going to have a conversation with me on stage for an audience. You'll be able to buy tickets. And we are going to talk to Diana Gabaldon about her time researching Outlander in North Carolina in the 90s, her first trips to town, what it was like to try to get a handle on the Scottish history of North Carolina in this area, why she included North Carolina in her books, specifically Moores Creek at the end of her 6th book. And we're going to have her reflect on Outlander's legacy because, of course, the TV show will be ending right around the time that Diana is here in Wilmington. So if you've ever wanted a reason to come to Wilmington for Outlander, February 2026 seems like a really good time because Diana Gabaldon is going to be here. And so we're thrilled that that was finally announced. We've been working on the announcement for that. I am thrilled that I get the chance to talk to her on stage. I've been able to interview her and talk to her a few times over the years. And she's such a delight. She loves all of you fans, all of us fans. I'm one of them. And she loves talking about this history. And so I think that I can speak for myself, but everybody who's been planning this, but also all of you, that this is absolutely thrilling news. We have wanted to see Diana here in the area for years, and it's finally happening for the biggest historical commemoration really in our lifetimes for the 250th. And so I hope you all will find a way to come out. Like I said, I don't have specifics on the event details, on where to get tickets and all of that. All of that will be announced through the First in Freedom Festival. So I encourage you to go and look that up. There's a full website for it. There's social media for it. You can go and follow it. And then they will post there when tickets are available. And you can find all the ways in which you can come and interact with Diana and be in Wilmington and be in the Cape Fear for this wonderful event. So we hope that you all can join us. Up next, of course, we just went through Outlander Blood of My Blood, which I quite enjoyed, and I hope you all did too. And of course, early 2026, we will have the final season. So there's a tremendous amount to get excited about with Outlander. I've been promised by the producers that Outlander will come back to North Carolina and spend at least a little bit of time here in its final 10 episodes. So hopefully there'll be some new additions to add to our trek across Outlander's North Carolina. But to finish up, I encourage you all to follow the Burgwin-Wright House on social media, to go to our website. We are a nonprofit house museum, so we always appreciate donations. Large or small, whatever you can do, it all helps keep the doors open so we can keep talking about not only Wilmington's Outlander history, but Wilmington's colonial history at, again, this wonderful time. You can come visit us for house tours. We do house tours 6 days a week, 6 times a day from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And of course, you can listen to the podcast, which I showed you is available everywhere. We have our seasons on Outlander, but we also have a Cape Fear Legends and Lore season, and we have a Haunted Tales of the Cape Fear season where we went to each one of our historic sites locally and talk to their managers about the ghost stories that persist after so many years. And with that, I'm going to close my screen. I'm going to let Aaron come back. And I think we had a few questions that we may or may not just have a few minutes to do. I apologize that I went a little bit long, but I particularly love um, this particular topic.
I don't think that anyone minded that you went over a little bit at all. Um, I'm sorry. I just have like Diana Gabaldon in the state of North Carolina brain right now. So
Me too.
words are a little challenging, but I'm going to do what I can. I don't want to take up too much more of your time or our attendees' time. But where to go? Too many things. What I'm a nosy person by nature. So I think the one question I'm just going to ask, because you covered so much and so incredibly, and it was fascinating, is what sparked, and if you mentioned this early on, I apologize. There was a lot going on.
I
What
didn't, so I know what you're going to ask.
what sparked your passion for all things Outlander? Because you can be doing your job, like this is your job, you have to do it, but you have more than that. And it's
Yeah.
clear and evident that you have more than that, that you do have that passion. So where'd that come from?
It came from the exact reason that everybody's here today. I was a fan of Outlander. I admittedly watched the TV show first. My background is actually in film and television history. And so I write about TV shows, both locally shot and shot across the world for different national publications. It gives me a reason to talk to the stars of Outlander. I've been able to interview Sam and Katrina a few times. I got to tell them the first time that I lived in the real Wilmington, and Sam's response was, "Is it as muddy as ours is?" And I said, "No." And so thankfully we've gotten asphalt at this point. But I always joke with people, there's two Wilmington, North Carolinas in the world. There's the one that I'm sitting in, and the one they built in Scotland for this TV show. And that's so tremendous. And I was a fan of the TV show. When I got to the Burgwin-Wright house, I was just really excited about doing another podcast, but I did not have the marketing budget. Outlander was coming back, and I knew, having written about the impact that this series has had on historic sites in Scotland and here in North Carolina. I thought it would be a great way to kind of blend my two loves. My specialty is the intersection of popular culture and history. When I first started here, I was writing about the TV show Sleepy Hollow, which had a zombie George Washington. You're not going to see that in Outlander, but Outlander does work with facts. And while some of it is fictionalized for its story, I just told you all a ton of facts that we talk about every single day at this house. And so it was kind of a no-brainer. I've loved history my entire life, thanks to my father and my grandmother. And Outlander is kind of the perfect intersection of everything I love. And so my passion for it is rooted in that it gives me a chance to do that literally every day.
I love that. And we're so glad that you do that every single day. And that you were with us tonight. I want to leave you with a few kudos. I could not get all of them or even half of them or even a quarter of them. But I want you to be able to see or hear people say, thank you so much for such a thought-provoking presentation. Thank you so much for all of your knowledge and insights. This is a great forum. What an excellent speaker. Such a delight. Somebody said that they took your water tour a couple years ago and loved that.
Oh,
So
good.
you've got fans, you've got groupies. Excellent presentation. Thank you for all of your hard work. One or two people might be excited about the Diana thing. So
Just
they're
wanted
looking forward to more information about that at some point. But
to.
thank
Well,
you
thank you
so
all
much.
for having me. And I saw someone in there that said they wouldn't have thought that I was a show fan first. TV's
Yes.
always where I start, but I will say you should see my copies of those books. I have so many post-its with notes on history. And so I have become a book fan through that. I'm just a slow reader, so it took me a few years.
I mean, it probably took you like a decade with as thick
Yeah.
as your
Yeah.
books are.
Um, but thank you all for having me. And thank you, Aaron and Heidi. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of this series and you get to hear from Diana herself. So, I mean,
We're not going
it's
to
the
talk
best
about
thing.
that yet. I
You
need to
can do
be
it
able to
on this
breathe.
here. You can do this on this here in just a few weeks, and then you can see her in person here in the Cape Fear. And so we hope you all join us for that.
I think every single one of us is going to try to do that. So
There you go.
we look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much, Hunter. Thank you, everyone who joined us tonight. This was a great second program. We look forward to the remaining 6, and we hope to see you at those. But for right now, I'm going to say good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hunter.
Of course. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye-bye.